Today, we are blessed to have in our midst two distinguished guests. And so by way of a brief introduction, I will let you all know some of the things that our special guests have been doing over the last little while. Our first guest is the Honorable Justice Rod Jerke of the Alberta Court of King's Bench. Justice Jerke was appointed to the bench in March 2011. On getting to the bench, Justice Jerke helped to form an initiative referred to as the Reforming the Family Justice System Initiative. It is run by the Alberta Court of King's Bench. He is indeed a co-convener of that initiative. That initiative strives to reimagine the family justice system here in Alberta and by implication across the country. He has also served as co-chair of the court's Access to Justice Steering Committee, and he continues to serve on the court's Diversity, Inclusion, and Access Steering Committee. Now, prior to his appointment to the bench, Justice Jerke practiced civil litigation in Lethbridge, Alberta. He was an active member of the Law Society of Alberta. At some point, he was the president of the Law Society of Alberta, specifically from 2010 to 2011. He also was president of the Pro Bono Law Alberta, as well as chair of the Law Society of Alberta's Conduct Committee. Our second distinguished speaker is Diana Lowe, KC. Diana Lowe, KC, is a lawyer with 38 years of experience. In addition to her legal practice, she researches and advocates for reform of the civil and family justice systems in Canada. Most recently, Diana served as the executive counsel to the Chief Justice of the Court of King's Bench of Alberta, and she retired from that position in 2020. Since then, she has set up her own private consulting firm, Reimagining Justice. She continues to support the court's Reforming the Family Justice System Initiative, and also works with other jurisdictions interested in justice system transformation. Please join me in welcoming our two distinguished guests. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to you and take us on a ride.
Fantastic. Thank you
Diana.
very much. Yep. Thank you for inviting us to speak with you today. We're going to tell you a story, the story of a journey to reimagine the family justice system in Alberta. We all know the story of the family justice system, but it's only a story, and the time has come to rewrite that story. We want to acknowledge the wisdom of Harold Johnston in his book, The Power of Story, on Truth, the Trickster, and New Fictions for a New Era, where he said at page 127, if you tell yourself a story over and over again, no matter how improbable it may sound when you begin, in time, the story will manifest itself. In fact, this story is already being rewritten. Every one of us has a stake in the story of family justice and an important contribution to the writing. This new story is one about family well-being, and it's all about the children. I'm a retired lawyer, as you've heard. I've been involved in many different aspects of civil and family justice and different kinds of practice over the years. And I'm here because I'm one of the co-leads of the RFJS, or Reforming Family Justice System Initiative. And of course, with me today is Justice Rod Jerke of the Court of King's Bench, and Rod is the court's co-convener in this initiative. The RFJS is a multi-sector, multi-year initiative that's aimed at improving outcomes for families who are dealing with family justice issues. It's convened by the Court of King's Bench of Alberta, the Alberta Court of Justice, the Law Society of Alberta, the Ministry of Justice of Alberta, Family and Community Services in the County of Strathcona, and Native Counseling Services of Alberta. We have hundreds of collaborators engaged in this work from across many different sectors. We'll be covering quite a bit of ground with you today. This has been a 10-year journey so far for the RFJS, and so we're not going to go into all of the details of the journey, but we're going to try to hit the highlights for you and to share our passion for this work. What we're really going to focus on with you today is systems transformation. What we know is that there's a tremendous concern about our justice systems and an appetite for change that's often expressed in terms like paradigm shift and transformational change. But to be honest, there isn't a lot of expertise or experience in doing this. So big calls for change tend to be answered by incremental, programmatic efforts. By contrast, our work in Alberta and more recently in BC and other Canadian provinces is taking a much larger systems transformation approach to the wicked problems in the family justice system. The RFJS is really a movement for big systems change, and while it's been formally convened, as I've explained, we have many, many collaborators working with us, and it actually involves even more people who are aligning their efforts with the theory of transformation that we've adopted. This slide reflects the kind of very strong statement that is often made about the family justice system. When we show this to members of the public who have experienced family justice processes or who know others who have been involved in separation, divorce, family violence, or child welfare matters, they nod their heads. We start here because this helps to underline the urgency for change.
In 2013, a number of reports came out from the National Action Committee, which were focused on improving access to justice. Canada's former Chief Justice, Beverley McLaughlin, was the honorary chair of the Action Committee, and so these reports were given a lot of attention in jurisdictions right across the country. These reports were the opportunity for change that led to the RFJS. There have been a number of reports documenting the problems with the family justice system. I'll just talk about 3 that were published by the National Action Committee. First of all, the Family Justice Reform Review of Reports and Initiatives, this is 2012, referenced 18 family justice reports from Canada and beyond, and many more initiatives. This very thorough review included a quote on page 4. It said this: "The perception that the various family justice reform efforts made to date have fallen short of the mark is reasonably common, as is the concomitant suggestion that something more drastic or fundamental is required to bring the necessary changes to family justice." The next is the Action Committee Beyond Wise Words report on family justice. This is 2013, where at pages 5 and 6 of the report, there's a quote that really underlines the urgency for change in terms of the impact of the existing system on the families we serve. First of all, there's a built-in tendency for the adversarial process to polarize spouses and exacerbate conflict. Secondly, parental conflict can be very harmful to children. Third, conflict tends to protract process, which already tends to be complex, costly, lengthy, and unpredictable. Fourth, justice systems need to do a better job of providing integrated services and multidisciplinary responses to the many non-legal dimensions to issues that arise when families are restructuring. And fifth, the complexity of family breakdown and the relative inaccessibility of the courts results in many family law problems remaining unaddressed and unresolved. Look, in Alberta, when we analyzed the discussion in the report, what we found is that while there was a strong concern about harms for families and calls for a drastic change, the actual recommendations tend to focus on what we know in the legal system, mainly process changes. The recommendations focus on ways to improve the formal justice system, to increase the skills of professionals who work in the system, to ensure better procedures, and to respond to the legal needs and education of the public, and so on. Finally, in the roadmap report of the Action Committee, which was published about 6 months later, there was a repeat of the call for a new way of thinking, which was referred to as a culture shift. In systems change work, we also speak about this as a shift in mental models, or paradigm shift. The Alberta RFJS initiative relied on the Action Committee reports to create the opportunity for change, and we focused our attention on the kind of drastic change or paradigm shift that the reports called for.
There really wasn't guidance in the Action Committee report about how we go about changing the paradigm. Indeed, we actually now see the reports as calling for a paradigm shift, but making recommendations that are about improving the existing paradigm. In fairness, the concept of a paradigm or culture shift is perhaps one of the most challenging concepts to describe. We often don't realize that we operate in a paradigm. It's just the way we see the world. Some important systems experts have written about this and helped us to understand that this is about opening up our minds to imagine what is possible. A very powerful description of a paradigm shift was written by Donella Meadows in about 1999. I first read her Leverage Points article in the early 2000s, and I can tell you, it caused me to think a lot. Meadows explained, and I think really was trying to console her readers, that systems change is often counterintuitive. We're used to thinking in a certain way, and that guides our actions. But if we really are going to bring about change, we need to think very differently. When we do this, we may even feel a little uncomfortable. So if you find yourself feeling that way today, it's okay. You're experiencing the kind of paradigm shift that the Action Committee called for and that we've been working with in Alberta. The article that I mentioned is now a chapter in a book called Thinking in Systems, and in it, Meadows identified 12 places to intervene in a system, which she set out in the order of those least likely to bring about change up to the most likely to bring about change. I'm not going to go through all 12 of them, but the two most likely ways to bring about change are, number 2, paradigms, or the ability to see the context that you're working in, and number 1, transcending paradigms, or the ability to stand outside of the system and see the other influences, systems, and contexts that need to be taken into account. So give that some time to just think about. This is stepping outside of what we know, outside of what we learn in law schools, outside of what we learn in all of our systems, and looking at how we fit into all of the other systems that are there. Meadows also told a story about her own mentor, Jay Forrester at MIT, who described efforts to bring about change in any system or organization. And what he told his students was that you can almost always find the leverage points in a system, as these are areas of significant focus that everyone is working on. But remember, he said, they're usually pushing in the wrong direction. I remember reading that the first time and many times after and really thinking about things like access to justice, which was work that I had been personally really involved in for many, many years, and wondering, are we really pushing in the wrong direction? And it turns out that in terms of systems change, we probably were. We want to share this adaptive loop diagram with you. We first learned about this from one of the systems change facilitators who worked closely with the RFJS in our earlier years. His name is Mark Cabage. I think it really helps us to more clearly understand systems and systems transformation. Mark first explained to us that systems are actually always changing. What this diagram shows us is that every system, organization, or program begins down in the lower left-hand quadrant where you have a new idea that is developed and grown to maturity in the upper right-hand quadrant. That space of maturity is where most systems or organizations or programs spend the bulk of their time. You can see that the focus of leadership in an existing or mature system is on managing and conserving, and the traits of leadership are all about efficiency, stability, conservation, hierarchy, rules, and procedure. So if you think about different systems and where the pressures often are and the kinds of things that people talk about, think about whether it fits within this diagram. In every system, you eventually reach the point of declining results, when it's not possible to continue and no amount of effort at managing will preserve the existing system. Here, on this diagram, this is reflected by the little red star that you see moving down the loop into the space that's called release. I think this is very much the space that Jay Forrester was referring to. This is a space where there's a tremendous amount of energy being placed on conserving, managing, and making an existing system more efficient. Certainly the family justice system falls into this space. And I would say two things about that. This is hard work to maintain a system that's actually in decline or in crisis. And thank goodness that there are many people who are willing to put their energy into it. If we're talking about something like a restaurant, and they've reached a point of declining results, the owners would eventually put a sign up on the door that says, "Closed for transformation," and they would be able to focus on their new business. It might be a complete transformation, like they might decide to open up a food truck, or maybe it's going to become a fitness center. But they would be free to focus on that new paradigm once they've closed the door. We can't do that in our family justice system. We can't put a closed sign up at the courthouse or wherever you would think of an entry point into the justice system. So we need to keep the existing system operating, even while we recognize that we need to release and transform the system into something completely different. So we have to be able to hold work on both kinds of efforts together at the same time. And we need to understand that the types of effort that will improve an existing system are very different from those that will transform one. So the words are really quite important, whether we're talking about maintaining and conserving a system or transforming it. The RFJS represents the release, the exploration and the development of a new system, so the other part of the loop. It's about transformation, or the paradigm shift that was called for in the Action Committee reports, and it will lead to something very different than what we've experienced previously. Paradigm shifts tend to be successful when they're supported by new evidence. Think about campaigns to stop smoking, to make seatbelt use mandatory, to use blue boxes or other environmental changes. New evidence, most often about harms, were behind those and helped to bring about change. In terms of the family justice paradigm shift, the new evidence that guides our work is brain science. At the same time that the Action Committee reports were being released and discussed across the country, Justice Andrea Moen of the Court of King's Bench had become concerned about the impact of adversarial processes on families and particularly on children. She took a study leave to learn about brain science, and when she returned to the court, sought to bring about changes on the basis of that evidence. Andrea was the first of our RFJS leaders, and her involvement helped to ensure the support of the court, which was key to making this initiative possible. Upon her retirement from the court, Justice Jerke stepped into the role as the court's co-convener of the RFJS. In Alberta, we have the benefit of the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative, which has done extensive research, education, knowledge mobilization, and implementation of brain science into policy and programs. They make available a free online 19-module certification program in brain science, and we encourage our collaborators and especially justice system participants to become Brain Story certified. The Alberta Court of King's Bench has approved the certification as part of its continuing judicial education. And you may be interested to hear that Justice Jerke has completed the Brain Story certification and recently did a study leave focusing on the work of the RFJS and how the court can bring about this change.
Look, I'll just speak to you briefly about brain science, which includes the Adverse Childhood Experience Studies, or ACEs. If you were a lawyer or a parent in my family law chambers, or even in an early intervention case conference, such as I conducted here in Calgary about an hour and a half ago, you would have heard this spiel many times. From these studies, we know that the impact of ACEs increase exponentially the more ACEs a young person experiences. We see ACEs as directly relevant to family justice systems like this. Separation and divorce is one of the 10 ACEs. Abuse, neglect, and other household dysfunction are the 3 categories of ACEs and are part of the situations arising in child welfare and family violence matters. The family justice system itself often exacerbates, even causes, toxic stress for children and adults involved with it, because it's based on an adversarial model of dispute resolution that encourages a win-lose paradigm of conflict, rather than de-escalating conflict and creating conditions for collaborative decision-making. Parents can be caught up in a downward spiral that becomes about winning or losing, rather than about acting in ways that reduce the stress and support their child's brain development and resilience. Unfortunately, the removal of children from family homes and the incarceration of a parent are themselves ACEs. So what this means is that the responses our systems have often had to these situations have actually added to the ACEs burden for children in these families. It really is no wonder that so many family justice reports have suggested that family justice processes do more harm than good. The science proves it. The negative experiences or the negative consequences of ACEs include behaviors, physical and mental health issues, and including a lifelong risk for serious disease. ACEs disrupt the neurodevelopment of children. They cause social, emotional, and cognitive impairment in children and adults. They lead to the adoption of health risk behavior, disease, disability, and social problems, and they can result in early death. ACEs can also be transferred intergenerationally through epigenetics. This is very much aligned with Indigenous knowledge of intergenerational harm. In spite of the really challenging outcomes that we see in the ACE studies, there is hope in brain science knowledge. It helps us to know what causes harm and how we can prevent or reduce that harm. And we need to remember that our family justice processes are a human-designed system, a story. We can, and we say must, bring about fundamental change. Brain science is much more than just ACEs and trauma. It includes the science of resilience, which tells us about neuroplasticity, or the ability of the brain to change and adapt as a result of experience. If we take steps to reduce sources of stress, establish supports to help build responsive relationships, and strengthen core life skills, we can strengthen resilience and improve outcomes. This is where the hope comes from. These 3 principles to build resilience were established by the Harvard Center on the Developing Child and are important for reshaping policies and programs to ensure that we focus our approach on helping families to achieve healthy outcomes in spite of adverse experiences. In the RFJS, we refer to this as helping families thrive, and we're focusing on all 3 of the Harvard Center principles. The 3 principles are represented by the AFWI, Alberta Family Wellness Initiative Resilience Scale, which illustrates that we're working to provide positive supports, which we can achieve by helping families to gain the kind of supports they need for their social, relationship, parenting, and financial matters. Secondly, strengthen skills and abilities to manage stress, which can include skills that help to reduce conflict, to improve communication, and to learn better parenting skills. This is represented by shifting the fulcrum and helping to increase resilience. And third, decrease negative experiences, which often includes reducing the role of legal adversarial processes. Brain science is the powerful evidence that guides, drives, and supports this paradigm shift. The RFJS theory of change was developed through a powerful process that we were able to undertake with many different groups of our collaborators, including now you folks. What we realized as we did this is that most of what families are dealing with in their family situations, whether family restructuring, child welfare, or family violence, is actually about their social needs, their relationships, parenting, financial, and health needs, and that there may also be a legal element to these. But what the justice system has focused on has always been the perceived legal needs. And what we realized is that by giving such priority and focus to legal responses, we are definitely not helping families to deal with their social, relationship, parenting, financial, or health needs. Indeed, the tools of our legal system often make the situation worse for families, as we really only have the tools for fighting. So we need to untangle the social, relationship, parenting, financial, and health needs from legal, and then ensure that families have the skills and supports they need to address all of these needs. Much of what we're doing with the RFJS is creating a different path for families to reduce the reliance on legal adversarial processes and to ensure that they obtain the kinds of skills and supports that they need outside of legal adversarial processes. We're collaborating with many different sectors to get their assistance in creating these new pathways. This is our paradigm shift. What we're imagining is a family justice system where families thrive. Through brain science and ACEs, the system has a lot of understanding now about why we need to do this transformational change, but not so much about how we can do this. We know that the work we're doing to transform the family justice system involves shifts in thinking, policy, organizations, programs, and resources, and requires commitment and leadership of a broad collaboration over time. We've been taking a lot of steps already, have been learning about systems design, processes, and have had the benefit of some systems experts such as Mark Kabaj, who we mentioned earlier, and many others. Mark shared this Giels framework with us, which really helps to visualize systems change and how our efforts fit within the framework. When I shared this at a faculty seminar during my study leave last year at the U of A, it generated much discussion by faculty members who identified links to work and thinking they were already doing in law and social change. It helps us to see that change happens at 3 levels simultaneously. The pink level is culture. The arrows show that there's movement from left to right, which we visualize as the move from legal adversarial approaches on the left to family wellness on the right. The purple level is at the bottom is niche innovations, which are small experiments with new ideas. This is the kind of social lab work that occurs to develop and test new ideas. The blue level in the middle is the system. This shows that there are many different players who are all aligning their efforts while retaining their own independence. The system is influenced by changes in culture and by new ideas as they emerge. Together, the culture shift and niche innovations put pressure on the system to change, resulting in changes to legislation, policy, programs, and so on, as we move from left to right the system is reshaped completely. Systems change is successful when it's aligned around the common outcomes sought in a theory of change or transformation. In our case, the goal of improved outcomes for families or helping families thrive. We found tremendous value in this framework. And our next step was to bring this to action through strategies to address all three levels of action and to visualize the way that these efforts influence and build momentum. Over the past 3 years, we've been working with our counterparts in BC and with Insight Formation to develop a joint strategy map and strategy engagement tools to more fully support the action that's occurring, including capacity development and the ability to build momentum by visualizing the work together. As you'll see, we've incorporated this GEALS framework into our strategy map.
So keep that visual in mind. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the kinds of tools that are actually moving us to action, which is this strategy mapping approach. A well-designed strategy map improves the odds of succeeding with a large-scale systems change by helping to organize complex collaborations of many different organizations involved in different but mutually reinforcing and aligned actions. By managing the details of the very short-term actions while allowing everybody to see how that fits into the larger vision of systems change that will take longer to achieve. It's really a powerful communication tool. And it also provides a structure that monitors progress on actions and measures that help us to see how change is happening even beyond the efforts of any single organization. So what is a strategy map? A strategy map is a visual representation of an aligned set or system of strategies that's going to help to bring about change. It's kind of like a logic model or theory of change. It's a way of linking aspirations with capacities. And strategy mapping, though, is much more robust and so better suited to large transformational systems change like we're doing with the RFJS. So you'll see that the outcome is aspirational, and that's at the top of the strategy map. It expresses the purpose of the collaboration or the big change that we're seeking. The strategies, actions, and measures are all designed to help achieve the outcome. Strategies to achieve outcomes have sub-strategies that are logically connected. To have X happen, you need to do Y, and then we can identify specific actions and participants and then the measures that we need. Capacity development is about the conditions you need in place in order to do the strategies. And you can add in a great deal of detail at all of the levels of the strategy map and also zoom in to work deeper and deeper in these sub-strategies and actions, just like you can zoom into a Google map. This is what we refer to as our Transforming the Family Justice System map, which was developed by Alberta and British Columbia, and which we're happy to share with you. There's a lot going on in this slide. Near the top is our outcome objective that relates specifically to our goal of transforming the family justice system by focusing on achieving family well-being. The 3 principles for creating resilience, which were identified by the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, are reflected here in the outcome strategies. You'll see them where they talk about reducing toxic stress, strengthening core life skills, and building supports for families. In the outcome strategies, we also recognize the need to integrate this work across many sectors: justice, health, education, early childhood development, the domestic violence sector, the dispute resolution sector, family supports, to name a few. And we also need to include many different perspectives: public users, faith-based, Indigenous, New Canadians, poverty-serving agencies, and the list goes on. We also need to look at reducing costs. Then when you move into the center of the map, this is where you'll see that we arranged our action strategies into 3 categories, the same categories as what you saw in the GEALS framework. So if you just turn that 45 degrees. In the left-hand column, you'll see the strategies that are focused on achieving a paradigm shift based in brain science. This is really about the creation of a new mental model based on an understanding of ACEs and toxic stress, and shifting the focus in our system away from legal responses to a well-being approach for children and families. In the GEALS framework, this is the landscape or culture shift, the big pink arrows across the top. In the right-hand column, you'll see the strategies are about innovations that will show new ways of addressing the needs of families. Innovations are needed to create transformational change, which means a willingness to try new ideas without fear of failing. That's hard in an existing system. People are risk averse, and it takes a lot to get them to a space where they can actually do this. This kind of work is made possible in social lab settings, which we're working with in Alberta. Once there's comfort with this prototyping, the new ideas are ready to come into the mainstream where they can have impact. In the GEALS framework, these are the little purple arrows or niche innovations that help to nudge the system towards change. In the center column here are broadly defined justice policies and programs. Changes here in all of the sectors are essential, but we know that systems have a tendency to be sticky, and often people in the mainstream of any operating system won't adopt changes to policies and structures without seeing how the changes will work. Also, we know that when change is sought, there's often a push just to go straight to legislation, policy, or programs without also ensuring a shift in the mental model or testing some of these new approaches. What happens then is that while changes are passed formally, they actually result in very little real change occurring in practice. This model is designed to ensure success with the overall regime or systems shift. In the bottom level of the map, we identified capacity development that will help to create a strong foundation for this work, the necessary conditions to succeed with these strategies. From this strategy map, we can zoom out to a higher level map that actually engages a number of different sectors in work around adverse childhood experiences, or to zoom in to see more detailed strategies. I'm going to illustrate this by clicking on, you can see a little wee plus sign in some of these strategies. We'll go on to one of the strategies that is here called Increasing Justice Sector Education in Brain Science and Understanding about the Impact of Trauma, where you can see that little plus sign, and it takes us to the next level of the strategy map. In this example, we've identified 3 groups of justice system participants that we're working with on brain science education, although there are actually many more than just these 3. Each of these engage different groups. So in law schools, we're talking about professors, curriculum committees, law students. In the judicial sector, we're talking about judicial education organizations such as the National Judicial Institute, the Canadian Institute for the Administration of Justice, and individual courts who are all engaged in judicial education. And continuing legal educations help us with those lawyers who are already out practicing, as well as the Law Society and Bar Associations who will influence the types of education. From here, we can move into a strategy engagement platform that's been developed by our partners at Insight Formation. This supports us to develop appropriate measures, targets, and actions relating to each of these deeper strategy objectives. And the platform has many integrated tools to support the work. So when people say, how are you really doing this? These are some of the tools we're using, not only to help guide the work we're doing, but really to help us to see, are we making the changes that we intend, and are we meeting our measures? What more do we need to do? Who else needs to be involved? What we look here is that we're really experimenting to try and change and achieve the kinds of outcomes that we need, and so we continue to rely on evidence, and these tools that we're using help to ensure that we're actually getting somewhere and that we're moving this in the right direction. I'm just going to show you a few slides from the Insight Vision platform to give you a sense of the information it holds to support our work. Details about each objective on the strategy map can be stored in the platform. What you can see is a visual from the Insight Vision data, where we've put in information relating to our objective of increasing justice sector education in brain science and understanding about the impact of trauma. We've added a visual that's well known to those who are working with resources on brain science from the AFWI initiative, and the information on this page is about their free online brain story certification and includes the URL to be taking that program. From this page, we could go back to the strategy map view, or we can click on any number of the tabs that will help us to achieve these outcomes. This kind of data, measures, and actions can be tracked for each of our strategies and the sub-strategies, and gives us a clear understanding of how we're doing with each of the individual actions that help us to drive the change. And all of this information can be captured in a scorecard, which is what you can see in front of you, that rolls the details together at a glance. This is another way to visualize the data about the change that's taking place. Here you can see the different strategy objectives and whether they're progressing as intended. Green means the targets are being met, yellow that they're in progress, and red that they're not being met. The arrows tell us the direction of change. Interestingly, you can see that in the measures of continuing legal education, CLE programs that are emphasizing brain science, although the target has been met, there's been a change that's going down over time. That provides important information to us about the direction of change, which the collaborators can then look at and respond to ensure that we keep moving in the correct direction. There's little red folders over on the right-hand side. Those take us back to actions. So these are all interlinked, and as we update our data, all of the information is available and changed at the same time. The Insight Vision platform is something that we're using with work that we're doing in Alberta, and that we're using as a demonstration across the country for how this type of change can actually take place.
We know that real change is needed. This comes from most of the family justice reports that have been published in recent decades, and is echoed by the people who work in our system and by the families we serve. From the very outset, as we engaged with collaborators across many different sectors, even just in the development of our theory of change, the idea that we were going to focus on helping families to thrive caused people to call out, "That's it! That's what we need to do! And that's our lodestar!" And we continue to hear a great deal of enthusiasm about our work, which includes expanding our group of collaborators and the sectors that are working with us. Professor Trevor Farrow, now Dean at Osgood, I think, his 2014 research and paper, "What is Access to Justice?" identified the way that professionals who work inside our justice system tend to define justice and access to justice, focusing on access to the courts, access to lawyers, simplified processes, mediation, and other methods of resolving disputes. These are reflected in the recommendations in the reports of the Action Committee. But Farrow's researchers also spoke with members of the public to ask for their reflections on justice and access to justice. About a quarter of those they spoke to defined justice and access to justice in the same way as justice system actors do. But the remaining 3/4 had a very different response, which can be boiled down to the right to a good life. We found this very helpful and affirming of our theory of transformation, which is about helping families thrive or family well-being, the right to a good life. And we know the importance of putting the needs of the public at the center of our efforts.
We've described this to hundreds of people in an effort to spread the word in something we call ambassadors for change. There's almost always a great deal of excitement, but I remember in particular having one of the people I was speaking to who's a leader in the Indigenous community in Alberta, and he really couldn't contain himself. He interrupted me to explain that the Cree term "Mao'tnisuin" can be understood to mean the good life. He found that this really resonated with his Indigenous knowledge and ways of seeing the world. This is powerful at a time when we're all seeking to understand Indigenous truths and move together to reconciliation.
And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't again mention the evidence of brain science, which for us explains the impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma and how this can help to guide the kinds of changes that we need to undertake in order to build resilience. I want to just briefly tell you about some of the recognition of our work that is happening beyond the family justice system in the world of systems transformation. The first is a report called Addressing Complex and Cross-Boundary Challenges in Government, the Value of Strategy Mapping. The link to the report is here, as is a link to a podcast by one of the lead authors, Professor John Bryson, and a link to related resources by Bill Barberg of Insight Formation. This report was published by the very prestigious IBM Center for the Business of Government in January of this year, which highlights the RFJS and our strategy mapping approach and Insight Vision platform as a case study. There are 2 additional case studies in the report, but the complexity of the RFJS is recognized in this way. A longer-term system change effort, including key actor involvement, relationship building, understanding the system to be changed, catalyzing multiple independent implementing actions, and monitoring and managing the change effort over many years. That was from page 39. The case study about the RFJS is at pages 31 to 37 and really underlines both the complexity and the progress that is being achieved. There's also a discussion in the report appendix, pages 49 to 53, about a number of strategy mapping software platforms that were independently analyzed and assessed for effectiveness for strategy formulation and implementation. The Insight Vision platform that we use is assessed as the most powerful of the strategy mapping platforms reviewed for strategy implementation. That's at page 52. And this reinforces for us that we're on the right path and that the tools we're using are most likely to succeed in implementation. We're thrilled to see the recognition of our work and to read such a thoughtful, thorough, and influential analysis of the kinds of tools that are available. There was also an article published in May of 2021 by Leaders in System Change, which uses our work as a case study and gives us confidence that Alberta and BC are definitely leading the way with the kind of transformational systems change approach that has been adopted. And the authors of the article also took part in a 2021 webinar to discuss the case study and transformational change more broadly. The link to the webinar recording is in the resource list that we've shared.
We've spent quite a bit of time explaining why we've undertaken the RFJS and how we're approaching this initiative as a large-scale transformational systems change. We want to move into telling you about some of the changes that are actually taking place and the momentum that these are helping to create. At the capacity development level that is in our strategy map, we've included building our capacity around doing systems work, which includes understanding the economics and resources that are needed to succeed. We're working with Mark Anielski, who's an Edmonton-based well-being economist, and he's going to help us to develop a well-being framework to demonstrate that this approach will not only have better results, but will also have a better economic outcome.
When I described our work to an economics professor during my study leave, he was very interested in our work and measuring the economic benefits in his word. And what he said in his words, this has got Shirk Grant written all over it. We'd like to share some of the actions taking place in each of the 3 levels of change that we identified in the Gales framework and incorporated into our strategy map. But first, let's get personal. Let me tell you a story. I've been a lawyer and a judge for many years and have been aware of many of the tools and approaches that have been identified as better approaches to family matters. Indeed, I've applied some of them in my courtroom. Today I did. However, I clearly remember the first time I decided to apply the overarching strategy of the Reforming the Family Justice System initiative on a file that had been in the family justice system for years. It was my first time hearing an application by these parents. It was a special chambers hearing with several red flags. That might be what made me feel that this was a case that cried out for a different approach. The file was 14 inches thick. They had a dozen previous orders, all with respect to parenting. They had reached a final resolution 6 months before and were now applying to vary it. Both parents had well-paying jobs, but neither of them had a lawyer because they had exhausted their financial resources. In such a scenario, there are legal principles that I could have employed, including simply declining their application and enforcing the previous order. While simple, this approach worried me. I was aware that brain science demonstrated that parental conflict can cause changes in developing brains of children and can manifest in a host of very serious lifelong outcomes. I worried for this family. I decided to try something different. I decided to apply the principles from the RFJS and try to achieve a better outcome for this family. I'll get back to my story in just a little bit. We described our culture shift already, which is represented in the large pink arrows across the top of the Giels framework and the first column in our strategy map. This is the most powerful change and where we have focused a lot of our effort over the last 10 years. As we've explained, brain science is the new knowledge that has helped us to achieve the understandings that guide the RFJS. From this knowledge about the impact of toxic stress in families, and most particularly children, we know that we can't continue to do harm. Essentially, we're working to take separation and divorce off the list of ACEs and to focus on reducing the negative impacts of other ACEs on family well-being in separation, divorce, domestic violence, and child welfare matters. We start with encouraging and supporting brain science education. As mentioned, the court supported me in this process by recognizing this as part of mandatory continuing judicial education for all members of the Court of King's Bench. We've also run a Legal Education Society of Alberta program for lawyers and have been able to bring brain science into collaborator workshops, judicial education seminars, and community workshops. This is something that everyone can do. The online Core Story Brain Science certification is available everywhere in both English and French and is free. You'll find links in our resource list so you can all get started. We're observing a shift in language, programs, and approaches, which are all examples of the mental model shift that is starting to take hold. We've helped to support and encourage many innovations that align with our theories of change, with our theory of change. These innovations begin as ideas, which are developed or prototyped, tested, and if promising, may be moved into the real world as pilots or new initiatives. Co-Parenter is an online tool based in brain science that's aimed at assisting parents to work together to address the everyday challenges of parenting in a way that reduces stress and increases family well-being. The app includes many tools that coach and empower families to work together to parent their children, including assistance with communication, parenting agreements, and addressing their day-to-day issues through online processes. Perhaps most important is the real-time access to coaching and mediation by family mediators. It is really a parenting tool with the aim of helping families to thrive. During the first 8 months of the pandemic lockdown, anybody remember that? The developer provided it free for Alberta families. And we had 12 volunteer mediators here in Alberta who provided the coaching and mediation assistance available through the app. While this was helpful for families during the pandemic, it was also an opportunity for the system to experience the kind of significant change that the RFJS is promoting to families. The court made recommendations and orders requiring families to use the tools to improve their ability to communicate and resolve their parenting issues. And judges continue to make these orders today. Personally, I haven't done so since the day before yesterday. They're happening.
With the benefit of the free co-parenter license, we were able to create a case study on the use of co-parenter in very high conflict families that were being supported by the Calgary Women's Emergency Shelter, which you may now know as Fear is Not Love. More than 25 families were using the tool during the case study and received supports that helped them to deal with the challenges of parenting children, not only during a pandemic, but in a situation of high conflict and even abuse. The volunteer mediators made it very clear to us that they're very committed to the use of the app. They see it as an extremely effective method of assisting parents to address family matters and to empower them to parent their children and to reduce reliance on adversarial processes. Another exciting innovation is the Divorce Magazine, which is a publication created even before the RFJS to inform the public about the wide variety of services that are available for families: co-parent coaching, life coaching, financial, insurance, mediation, and legal. The RFJS introduced the publisher to Brain Science, which she adopted, investing significant funding and effort to create symposiums and divorce resource groups that bring professionals together with members of the public who are experiencing separation and divorce. At pages 6 to 7 of the current issue of the magazine, you can find an article about the RFJS, which is great for sharing with clients and members of the public, and we've got similar articles in the past 7 issues of the magazine. The divorce resource groups that I mentioned met online throughout the pandemic and included many professionals who shared their expertise with members of the public. These meetings are continuing, and the publisher has now created a YouTube channel and podcast with recordings from the keynote presentations of these monthly meetings, and those are all available for free. An online symposium is held each year and was just held on September 26th with speakers from among the various professionals that publish in the magazine. Justice Jerke and I provided the keynote for the symposium, which allows us an opportunity to update participants about the RFJS, but also to encourage them to become familiar with brain science and to find a path to well-being as they deal with their family issues. The symposium was recorded, and you can obtain access to the link by going to the Divorce Magazine website.
The Court of King's Bench has been leading an effort in the community of Grande Prairie to explore the possibility of shifting the path that families take in their family matters. Since March 2020, Diana and I, along with the other co-conveners, have had approximately 35 in-person and virtual meetings with a growing number of community members there, including family lawyers, mediators, collaborative practitioners, family and community support services representatives, Native Counseling Services of Alberta staff, family support services, police, Crown, Provincial Court, Court of Justice, and domestic and sexual violence organizations. We were able to have Dr. Nicole Sharon, a neuroscientist and the former scientific director with the AFWI, provide an afternoon workshop on brain science, and have of course encouraged our Grande Prairie collaborators to complete the brain science certification. With funding from foundations, we have brought in insight formation to introduce and begin working with the strategy map, developing deeper understanding of the innovation strategies and from to gap statements. We've continued with identifying measures, actions, and commitments from the community to begin working on areas of focus. Grande Prairie is essentially a demonstration community for the RFJS. Last fall, we learned that one of our community collaborators, the Grande Prairie Family Education Society, was successful in a funding proposal to the City of Grande Prairie Family and Community Support Services. The grant is providing 4 years of funding that will support staffing in a new family resilience navigator role, continued work for the whole community with insight formation, brain science education for the public and for professionals who work with families, expanding our community e-learning center, and the exploration of restorative justice in family matters. Well, we're thrilled, of course. Our long-term hope is that when the community of Grande Prairie is ready and supports are in place to assist families with the full spectrum of social, relationship, parenting, financial, health, and legal problems, the court will provide a pilot in Grande Prairie. That pilot, which is just one of many changes that will get us to the transformational system change, will essentially require and enable families to seek supports in community for all of their social, relationship, parenting, financial, and health problems. The idea will be that if that is approved, a practice note would be issued by the court requiring parties to seek supports and build skills relating to their social, relationship, parenting, and financial and health needs and issues. They'll be encouraged to pursue mediation for legal problems before they engage the court process. We've been discussing this already with the community collaborators in Grande Prairie and are planning continued prototyping sessions this fall to continue to develop this.
Another very exciting innovation is being explored in Grande Prairie, a model for separation and divorce that is completed outside of the courts in an administrative setting based on a practice in Denmark. The Grande Prairie community is particularly interested in the way that divorce is handled as a life event and not a legal or adversarial dispute. The process is primarily a simple and inexpensive online application, which includes a number of supports for families and enables them to move forward in a much more positive way from their experience of separation and divorce. The Grande Prairie community is interested in the possibility of collaborating to create a family resilience center, which would enable the online application for divorce away from court processes, and which would also bring together the many supports for families that they need as they go through and deal with social relationship, parenting, financial, and health needs. We've begun to discuss this both with the Alberta Ministry of Justice and with representatives of Justice Canada, and we clearly will need the federal government's collaboration to undertake this pilot, since right now you can only get a divorce if you apply to the court. There's a link to the information available from the Danish government in English about their processes for separation and divorce in the resource materials that we have provided.
When we described this model to our Grande Prairie collaborators, they said, "Take us to Denmark." They don't want a free trip, although they wouldn't mind, I suppose. They want to use the best ideas from other places, make them better by putting brain science and their own thoughts onto them, and reimagining the whole system. In Grande Prairie, one of the strategies the community collaborators have worked on together is to innovate ways that empower families to improve life, relationship, communication, and conflict skills and reduce harms. The group brainstormed on ideas and created next level down strategies. They worked on from-to gap statements, which helped to articulate the changes that they're seeking. Our facilitator, the president of Insight, was so impressed with the ideas that he was motivated to create community e-learning centers. He's working with communities across the US and Canada to develop the template and has given this to the Grande Prairie community at no cost. At a recent Grande Prairie meeting, we created a small working group to help build this resource out for the community. The RFJS is returning to some of the learnings of the New Ways for Families, NWFF, pilot that I was part of in Medicine Hat, Alberta, and exploring the possibility of working with Bill Eddy and his High Conflict Institute. As Bill describes, high conflict litigants don't need decisions as much as they need decision-making skills. His goal is not only to provide families with NWFF training, but also to train those who work with high conflict individuals so that they're surrounded with supports that will reinforce the skills that they learned through new ways. This will help to reduce the adversarial approach to family matters. Training for frontline service providers and for the judiciary is available online. Bill has taught education seminars for the Alberta Court of King's Bench, and he's interested in coming back to work with us. There's a really nice connection between the skills in communication and conflict resolution and the building of resilience. We're planning to introduce the program in Grande Prairie as part of our work in the community, which has been enabled by the new funding. One of our volunteer mediators is fully trained in new ways for families and keen to assist us with putting this into place. In March of 2022, the courts in Alberta, with the support of the Alberta and federal ministers of justice, announced a restorative justice pilot project for criminal matters. Interest soon arose in whether it would be possible to apply restorative approaches in family matters, and the RFJS has been invited to join in this discussion. As a result, the community of Grande Prairie is exploring the use of restorative approaches in family matters involving domestic violence. This is an exciting opportunity to shift the mental model away from an orientation of punishment to one of healing and restoring of all family members. We believe that as the community builds capacity in restorative approaches, this has the promise of expanding to prevention and to other areas of family law, which will help to improve outcomes for families. We will be holding a workshop at the Alberta Restorative Justice Association conference this fall here in Calgary, and we'll be collaborating with that organization as we move forward with this work.
Family violence is an area of family justice which cries out for new approaches based in brain science. Through changes in the approach of family violence, we hope to break the cycle of intergenerational harm and reduce and even prevent family violence. We're working with a number of organizations. SAGES has created a province-wide systems change process called IMPACT, which has adopted the goal of eradicating family and sexual violence. This work engages all of the family and sexual violence networks across the province who are seeking ways to prevent violence before it happens. I'm an impact mobilizer and have been involved with this work since the outset. SHIFT is a project based here at the University of Calgary and has worked with Impact to create a primary prevention framework for domestic and sexual violence. And the RFJS, again, has been very involved in this work and incorporating into it the concepts of brain science as well as restorative approaches. And the Calgary Domestic Violence Collective has adopted a strategy map that seeks to address and eradicate domestic and sexual violence by focusing on individual, family, and community well-being. They've adopted outcome strategies that are aligned with the RFJS, including supporting healing, increasing alignment, reducing binary approaches toward people experiencing and using violence, cultivating restorative approaches, and supporting belonging, dignity, and justice. The United Way here in Calgary is their primary funder, and they've also adopted a strategy engagement approach, which is promising for transformational change here in Calgary and across the province. While our early work focused on family restructuring and then on family violence, we're now moving into the area of child welfare. Just as our approach in family restructuring cases is a real departure from the typical efforts of our justice system, the same is true in child welfare cases. We're concerned first and foremost with the well-being of children. We want to ensure that we do no more harm by removing children from their families, communities, and culture. This is a significant shift in approach which we've been encouraging throughout the system, within families, in the Ministry of Children's Services, and with lawyers who represent children, as well as with judges who may be asked to decide these matters. Instead, what we want is to encourage support for families and communities to enable them to keep children in their homes. They should be supported by extended family and connected to their community and culture to the greatest extent possible. Child welfare has a significant impact in Indigenous communities, and indeed the first recommendations in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report are all in relation to child welfare. The Journey Home video that you see on the screen was created by Native Counselling Services of Alberta, and we feel should be mandatory for anyone involved with child welfare matters. You'll recall that systems are represented by the blue arrows in the middle of the GEALS framework and make up the middle column of our strategy map. So now we're going to talk to you about some of the actual systems level changes, not just the mental model shifts and the innovations that we've been working with. We've actually identified 6 key areas of work in our framework for change, including for courts, for the legal profession, frontline social services, government, Ministry of Justice specifically, and for the public. These are all systems level change impacting policy, programs, and institutions. With lawyers, for example, our goal is to encourage lawyers to become brain science informed or certified and to reconsider the ethical responsibility of lawyers in family matters, to ensure that toxic stress is reduced while supports are put in place and resilience is strengthened. The Law Society of Alberta has taken this idea forward to the Federation of Law Societies. The role of lawyers will be changed if we're successful in shifting this ethical responsibility, but not reduced. We envision the future of family law as having a very limited role for litigation or other legal adversarial processes. The role of lawyers will be that of a trusted solicitor who assists the parties to come to agreement and to document their agreement, rather than a barrister who brings matters before a court. While we're still in early days, the RFJS has been able to create and support systems level change, including opening up silos that really kept us from providing families with the supports that they actually need. A great example is that we've moved out of our justice system silo and discovered that there are almost 200 family and community support services offices right across the province, all with the legislative mandate to support families and prevent harm. In 2019, the Alberta Ministry of Justice undertook an important pilot which embedded the family justice navigators, formerly people in a role that was known as family court counselors. And these are social workers who are trained in brain science. And they were moved into an existing family and community services office in the county of Strathcona. The pilot opened up access to the supports that families need. This both resulted in better supports for families and also helped the family and community support counselors to see that they have an important role in supporting families that are dealing with family justice issues. They actually told us that their involvement in the pilot, and they did this, changed everything. They felt empowered to assist families that are dealing with their legal problems. The pilot provides a great potential for scaling out to FCS organizations and also other support services for families right across the province. The Family Justice Navigator role is actually the inspiration for the Family Resilience Navigator position that's been created in Grand Prairie with part of the funding that they've just received, and it's an example of scaling out this original pilot. In March of 2021, the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate for the province of Alberta issued their first ever statement of concern regarding the well-being of children whose families are involved in high-conflict custody disputes. The current concerns that they spoke about were actually quite well known, but it's really striking for us because this is an office that is mandated to address issues of children who are harmed while in care. The Child and Youth Advocate doesn't normally engage with the formal justice system, and yet in the statement, they specifically called on the Ministry of Justice to lead the work that is needed in order to address their concerns. In the spring, I met with a senior manager in the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate about engaging with their youth council to bring the voices and experiences of young people into our justice transformation work. And as we spoke, I learned that while their mandate is dealing with children who are in care, at least a third of the calls that they receive through intake are from kids who are struggling with the issues that arise in family restructuring. The OCYA doesn't know where to refer these matters, so we've begun to ask whether there's a possibility of opening up our silos again and creating a linkage between the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate and the FCSS services that are available across the province. Clearly, that would fill a tremendous gap for these young people who are experiencing high conflict within their own families. The Safe at Home pilot that took place in Clare's Home, Alberta, was an innovative pilot aimed at keeping women and children in the family home with access to outreach supports while providing temporary housing, programs, and supports for men who have perpetrated family violence. The pilot has ended just very recently, and Rowan House, where it was based, is now trying to obtain funding to enable this program to continue on an ongoing basis. This is a real shift away from the typical binary approach to family violence, which tends to be focused on concerns for safety and healing of victims and of punishment for perpetrators. What this pilot recognized is that people who use violence have often experienced high adverse childhood experiences and are themselves in need of healing. A focus on well-being can help to heal all of the family members and prevent future harm. Even the language is shifting away from victims and perpetrators to people who experience violence and those who use violence.
The Court of King's Bench here in Alberta has formally adopted the theory of change in its strategic plan. The RFJS provides formal updates to the court, and in our internal KB News publication, the court regularly speaks about the RFJS and expresses support for the change that is sought in keynote addresses to ADR organizations, the bar, and the public. We're seeing that individual judges are bringing about change in their courtrooms, and the court is exploring ways to bring about greater change, as can be seen in the Grand Prairie work that's underway as an exploration or niche innovation with the leadership and guidance of the court. What I thought I'd spend my last few minutes on is the last part of my story, and how I've been dealing with this shift at the front lines in my courtrooms where I have families coming before me. So let's go back to being personal, back to my story. I decided to do something different. I decided to apply the principles from the RFJS and try to achieve a better outcome for this family. I noted to the parents in court that they had already had too many judges, too many orders, and too much conflict, and this was causing problems for their family. Heads nodded in the gallery. I ordered that from this point onward, we were going to do things differently. Instead of having a different judge for every application, they were to work only with me. I was seized with their file, so any problems would come to me. More heads nodded. Then, rather than making a decision, I directed them to important resources. I told them to watch the Brain Story and Resilience videos on the AFWI website. I explained adverse childhood experiences to them and the harm their conflict was causing to their children. As well, I gave them other practical tools, including an online parenting tool and key skills, managed emotions, moderate behaviors, and flexible thinking. Skills to enhance communication and to help them work through their conflict. They followed this original direction, and we had 3 or 4 conferences over a number of months. I tried to be innovative and creative with them, coaching and encouraging them to address their issues together. I was not making decisions, but rather empowering them to do so. On the day of our last court application, almost everything had been resolved. They'd come to their own decisions. I only made one tiny decision. They'd figured everything else out themselves. They didn't need me or any judge anymore. All they had needed were the tools to do things differently. They needed somebody to stand up and say, we're going to do this a different way. There was a lot of emotion in the courtroom that day. They said, I don't know why we didn't do this years ago. This feels so much better. While this was a great outcome for this family, it was also a learning experience for me that I wanted to share more broadly. It underlined that if we do things differently, way differently, people will embrace it. People will embrace it because it's the right thing to do. They know in their hearts it's the right thing to do. The surprise is not that it might fail. The surprise is that it works so well. This story is not meant as an end in itself. It is meant as a means to an end. This approach is not intended as an end in itself, but is also a means to an end. That end is family well-being. While this represented a real shift for me, it is just an interim step toward the ultimate goal of preventing harm, increasing supports, and reducing the role of courts and conflict in family matters. It's the best I can do in my courtroom, where family matters are still coming before me on a regular basis. Ideally, as we work in an integrated way with community supports, as a society, we won't just think of family issues as requiring a legal response, such as court hearings and mediation. What we'll understand is that there needs to be counseling, relationship, parenting, and even financial supports. If these challenges are untangled from legal issues, families will be better supported, more resilient, and have much less to fight about. Hopefully, they'll spend much less time in our courtrooms or legal processes. We'll know we're successful in this when the history books tell of family issues being dealt with through court processes, and future generations will laugh in disbelief, asking, why would families ask judges to help them with social, relationship, parenting, or financial challenges? Good question. You did not hear it identified in my story, but the idea for this kind of approach I use is loosely based on learnings from the New Ways pilot that we had in Medicine Hat. That program used a combination of judicial impediments, for example, no applications pending completion of the program, training for the parents on dispute resolution, and judicial coaching. The key part of the training was to teach the parents three key skills: managed emotions, moderate behaviors, and flexible thinking. I used those phrases extensively, both when coaching families in chambers and helping folks to resolve problems at JDRs. They work, and I still use them. I wrote this story in the time before COVID. Since then, there's been further innovation in our court to move forward to front-end load the efforts to divert folks away from the court system to community supports, or at least to help them move away from the pointed stick of the adversarial system to a less adversarial dispute resolution system such as mediation. That is a very good thing. From a broader system vantage point, the RFJS seeks to achieve shift so that the justice system is not the place folks look for relationship issues. But obviously, there will still always be some folks, including some high conflict parents, who will need the pointed stick of legal adjudication. Broadly speaking, there are three key messages I want to leave you with. Number one, this works. Number two, the whole system can shift away from adversarial processes to wellness. And 3, families can be empowered to make their own decisions and to get the supports they need. We will provide a list of materials, links, and resources that we've found useful and to which we've directed many folks. If you have any questions about any of these resources, feel free to ask us. Feel free to use these and build on these with local services that would be helpful for families.
Systems change takes time. Think how long it took for us to accept that smoking is bad for our health, or to use seatbelts or blue boxes. There are already strong examples of real change taking hold in our family justice system, and many people in the broader community and in the RFJS are empowered when they see the court and other key institutions embracing this change. There are a number of resources that we need and that we want to share with you. We realize that the 7 that we've identified all begin with C. The strongest is creativity. There must be people who are creative, and we must reduce the barriers to innovate. We need to be open to new ideas or curiosity, and to be open to learn. We must be committed, because this is hard work. There must be a community to do this. Everybody has to be a part. This means having people who agree you're doing the right thing and then start doing it with you, because systems change is not a spectator sport. You need compassion or love for each other and especially for the families we serve. We need cash. We know that if we had more resources, we could do more. We'd be able to communicate more, collaborate more, encourage more, and better support those who are working with us. Indeed, most of what we've achieved over the last 5 years has been without any funding at all, including my time. But we're able to continue by spreading the word, aligning existing programs, and encouraging the kinds of shifts that are helping to shift mental models, play with new ideas, and bring about changes in our system. You can be part of this. You're just starting in your paths. And we would be happy to share what we've learned along this path to help you as you move forward. The final of our 7 C's is brain science. And while that's not a C, it's all about children.
This has been a quick review of the RFJS and the work that's been underway for more than 10 years now. But we're going to have to stop here. There's much more we could share with you about the changes that are already beginning to take place, but we'll have to leave that to the questions and conversations that follow, and we welcome your thoughts.
Thank you all very much. Thank you to the faculty for the opportunity.
Hi, everyone. We would now like to open the floor to questions. So if anyone has a question, if you could raise your hand, Nima or myself will bring the microphone and you can ask.
So my question, thank you, Justice Jerke, and Diana, I believe your name is. Yeah, thank you for coming here and sharing your knowledge with us. My question is, what resources are we introducing through RJS for the children who are exposed to family violence and are at risk of emotional and, I guess, behavioral problems?
Do you want to start that?
The kinds of resources and supports that we're working with, for example, include the kinds of supports that are available through family and community support services that are, as I said, there are 200 of these organizations around the province. I certainly didn't know about that until we were well into the work on the RFJS, and it includes counseling work, it includes programming for families, helping families to learn about the kinds of supports that they can bring to buffer the toxic stress that occurs rather than adding to it and leaving kids struggling on their own with these things. But that also occurs through Native counseling services, through programs that are available through psychologists and social workers that work in our communities and many other places. So often what we're finding is that we're working with existing organizations and sectors and just opening up the silos so that the justice system knows about these things and can better engage with them and help families in a way that is more coherent and that we do less harm while putting those supports in place.
And to make it personal, so I've told you my story of how I help in some ways with the kind of approach I take. But think of it from your perspective as a lawyer. Yeah. What can you do? Well, the greatest resource these kids have are the two people in the world that know them best and love them most. Their parents. You get the chance to work with those parents to help them understand what they're doing, the harm they're causing, and how they can move away from it. Lawyers are the gatekeepers in most situations. And you can treat that role in a very serious way to create, from your vantage point, from your perch, how do I create that wellness? How will I work with this person who is my client? What are they depending on? Are they depending on me to take it forward? Are they depending on me to help them create family wellness? And they may not know it, but they're depending on you to help create family wellness, because the dispute stuff doesn't really get all that pretty.
Good afternoon. I just had a question regarding some of the collaborators you had said you were working with so far. I'm just wondering if you have specific collaborators that you've been working with through the public legal education systems here in Alberta or through the family law bar specifically.
We certainly, one of the co-conveners of the RFJS is the Law Society of Alberta, and so all of the lawyers in the province through that co-convener. The Canadian Bar Association has long been part of the work that we are doing, and I have a meeting next week with the Alberta branch executive actually to just give them an update on the things that are going on. We've done work through the continuing legal education organizations, and we also are looking at helping to ensure that brain science is incorporated into the studies that law students go through in their articling programs to try to ensure that that is part of it. We get to come and talk to law schools whenever you invite us, and if anyone wants to invite me back to a family law class or just to sit down and do a seminar with you, I would be delighted to do that. We can do it less formally that way. So those are some of the examples. In the community of Grand Prairie, where we have a number of family lawyers who are practicing, they are all invited to be part of the RFJS with us, and that also includes the Grand Prairie Legal Guidance, which is part of the community public legal education work that comes out of the Edmonton Centre for Legal Assistance. And so they are tied in together provincially in this work, and they have all been invited from the beginning and engaging with us as well. So it's there. We go and we meet through the Alberta Law Foundation with all of the folks that are involved with the practice of family law, which includes public legal education, the bar, and many other organizations that are funded through ALPHA as well. But we're always happy to talk to more folks about it.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My question is more a public policy kind of question, and it pertains to the slide you showed us earlier from Denmark, where you can apply for separation online through those applications, whatnot. And I mean, I feel like, let's say you want a social structure wherein families stay intact, so that the kids grow up with parents around them with love and harmony and all. Like, when you see something like that application, right, that sort of makes it easier to not have the courts get involved in all this. And if you wanted to, say, get a divorce or separate, it's easier. You can just apply online, whatnot. So now what that does to me is it makes the whole process of separation easier, which means now that can have the unintended consequence wherein the child, now because it's easier to separate, it is easier for the child to not have two parents growing up, right? So like we've talked a lot about how you don't want something that was intended to do good but did harm instead. So when you look at something like that, like those quick divorce applications, do you think there is a chance that that might have an unintended consequence wherein it's misused to the detriment of children?
I think that in any of the work that we're doing around systems change, there's always that kind of risk, which is why we do a lot of work around prototyping, which is before this moves into the real world and is actually affecting families, we are testing and looking at those possibilities. What I would say to you is that the RFJS is not about promoting separation and divorce, but it is focused on well-being and ensuring that as people are going through making that choice to separate or to divorce, that they are doing so in a way that causes less harm. And what we have seen in the system that we have right now is an incredible amount of harm in the adversarial, protracted processes that exist. It is qualified as one of 10 adverse childhood experiences. So we know right away that we're doing something really harmful in the way that we approach separation and divorce. And what we're looking for is a way to improve that, not to promote separation and divorce, but to do that. And we will be looking at testing those things and ensuring that the kinds of supports that families actually need are there, which hasn't been the focus of our system up until now. When we've talked about improving our family justice system, we've talked about making it work faster and making it more simplified and getting more access to lawyers and courts, all of which is fine for the legal aspect of it, but does nothing about helping kids to have good relationships with their parents and to be well supported and to be resilient. So we do have that concern. I'm not ignoring it at all, but it's I think it's responded to when you think about the actual outcome that we're seeking, which is well-being, and that will be having a relationship with both parents.
To specifically respond there, I would say that that view is critical. We need to hear all the views of as many people as possible if we're going to reimagine and then actually design a healthy system that does create family well-being. And so, for example, I'll give you a specific example. When I put my proposal in for my study leave, I said, I'm going to do all this work and all these things, and then I'll come out with a pilot project. And I kind of had one pretty much in my mind when I started my study leave. And I was maybe looking at it from the perspective of, gee whiz, I already know a lot about this and I know what we're going to have to do here. Then we, along the way, fell into the idea that, you know what, maybe Justice Jerke doesn't actually know everything. It was not a revelation, but it was a reminder. We put it into the prototype process. I'm now on iteration 5, and it's way different. Way different. So the concept of adopting anything, remember I said the community in Grand Prairie said, take us to Denmark? They didn't mean go to Denmark, they meant show us that example. Let us bring in brain science and our own experiences and figure out what kind of a new system might really work. What they really were saying is, we're open to reimagining things on a very big scope. So any voice, if it's contrary, it's not wrong.
No.
We need to hear all the perspectives. So thank you for that question, actually. And welcome to the collaboration.
Yeah. Yay.
Thank you both for sharing your insights into this program, because I think it addresses a lot of the issues that I see with the justice system as well, being like witnessing what's actually happening in the court. So my question is around actually like support, or like this program, how does it, is there any kind of support towards the immigrants community, where there's a lot of new immigrants coming into Canada, into Calgary and Alberta right now, and they do have like different set of challenges beside family, or like within the family challenges that they have. So is there any particular kind of strategies that you have to deal with, for newcomers and immigrants?
When we began the work of the RFJS, one of the things that we built into just sort of the higher level principles of what we were doing is ensuring that we would bring all aspects in. So we have worked with a number of different communities, both faith-based and immigrant communities, as well as Indigenous communities. And what we really are looking at is a future where the communities, whether we're talking a geographic community or an immigrant community within a certain geography, will help us to identify the kinds of supports that they need and how best to deal with them. That could be about language. It could be about particular approaches that might be a little bit different for them. We certainly know from working with our Indigenous collaborators that they're saying to us all the time that while some of these ideas, like the apps that we showed and those sorts of things, are wonderful, they need to be dealing with different languages. We need to be aware that they may not work well in some of the remote communities. And so what we again need to do is to have people like yourself come and help us to identify what those things are, or introduce us to folks in the community that you think would be interested in this so that they will help us to learn. And we anticipate, for example, if we are able to build a family resilience center in Grand Prairie as one of the outcomes that we're looking at that will help us with the divorce there, that as we then look at the Indigenous communities that are around Grand Prairie, as we look at the county of Grand Prairie that has a slightly different community, and as we look within at the immigrant community within Grand Prairie, that we will ensure that we're responding to those needs. So we need to work together to be able to do that. I don't know if that really answers your question, because I can't say to you, yes, and we've got this happening, but we've identified it, and it is part of what we're doing as we get closer and closer to being able to build out the details of that center. Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions. On behalf of the University of Calgary Faculty of Law and Student Legal Assistants, thank you so much, Justice Jerke and Ms. Lowe, for presenting here today. If we could give them one last round of applause, please.
Thank you. I don't think we needed gifts. I think it's a gift to come here and talk to you, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all very much for coming, and if you forget everything I said, please, as you go forward into what I consider could be the most exciting time to be entering the practice of law, please just remember one thing. It's all about the children. Thank you.
Justice Jerke is going back to court pretty quickly. If anyone has time, I know you may have classes to run off to, you can stay and I'll chat with you about these things.